There are no maps for how orcs conquer, no elegant doctrines inked by quill or koch, no data slates passed between strategists in silent chambers. Only war, only sound, only teeth and scrap and fire. Yet planets fall, systems shudder, and the Imperium keeps asking the same question. How? How does a species so chaotic, so fragmented, The answer is not logic. It is not madness. It is something older, something deeper, because orcs do not plan like we do. They plan like storms, and when the storm comes, you will think it is random. You will think it is noise. But buried in the noise is a pattern older than language, a strategy that does not need orders, a war that organizes itself. Across thousands of battlefields, inquisitors have died trying to decode what you're about to hear. Their findings were buried, their recordings lost. But if even half of it is true, then the Ork Waaaghs is not a tide, it is a code. And if that code is real, every fortress you build, every wall you raise, every campaign you fight may already be part of it. Like, subscribe, and listen, because once you hear the logic of the Waaaghs, you can't unhear it. The first raid was dismissed before the flame finished settling. An orc scrap ship slammed into the mining colony of Varn's Drift with the grace of a stone hurled by a mad child. No tactical value, no resource nodes marked for harvesting, just 3 hours of shouting, axe work, and improvised combustion, then silence. Then laughter, recorded faintly in a dying vox bead, buried in the corpse of a cumser. The laughter wasn't from the orcs. The second strike hit 61 hours later. Different world, different fleet vector. Same pattern, no demands, no broadcasted intentions, just thunder. The orcs emerged not from orbit, but from the crust, burrowing through a subsurface tunnel system no one remembered digging. And again, it ended not with a conquest, but with retreat. At least, that's what the brass called it. What the survivors described was different. Orcs that took nothing, but seemed to be counting something. Not scavenging, but scanning. One guardsman swore he saw one of the greenskins hold up a severed servalim like a compass, sniffing it before tossing it away with disinterest. The third attack came too fast. This time, on a relay moon, near the Damocles Gulf's edge. Population, 42 Vox adepts, and 1 astropathic choir. There were no survivors, but the recordings remained screaming static. Then silence, then a low thrum that built into rhythm. Not words, not speech, just a pulse, a beat. Someone in Segmentum Command flagged the pattern, said it matched the drum cadence used in the Gork's Waaaghs 70 years prior. They were ignored. The Imperium sees only the front of the tide. Each orc raid is written as its own act of madness, localized, tragic, forgettable. A patrol gone wrong, a garrison overrun. Never patterns, never meaning. But in the subsector's deepest vox, caches where astropaths feed their minds into labyrinths of overlapping. Chatter something began to connect. A name, spoken in 3 different dialects. Mogrok. A glyph burned into 3 different walls. Always drawn, with the same number of strokes. 8. Always 8. In the Mechanicus Enclave on Therix V. Tech Priest Monitorius 42 watched the raids unfold in silence. Not because he doubted their importance, but because he heard something no others could. His Auspex arrays, tuned to parse deep machine hymns, began vibrating during the playback of raid footage. Not randomly, with increasing harmony. The raids were syncing, not in content, but in rhythm. Pulse signatures, explosive frequencies, even the screams all converging into an emergent beat. Structure. He ran the recordings through forbidden syllogistic algorithms used once to track dark mechanicum heresy in the Rubicon schism. The output did not give coordinates. It gave a shape, a looping spiral, each node corresponding to a raid, each curve curling tighter, drawing inward. It wasn't just a path. It was a conductor's hand, and the Orks were following it. Somewhere in the dead files of the Inquisitorial Archive on Syndaxa, there is a redacted report entitled Non-Linear Organizational Heuristics in Xenos Horde Behavior. It theorized that Orks, under certain conditions, do not follow leaders but frequencies, not audible commands, but contextual resonance. A pattern begins, unspoken, and those nearby imitate. The imitation spreads. A glyph is drawn not because it is ordered, but because it feels right. And through that feeling, coordination begins. That theory was shelved because it could not be weaponized. You cannot jam instinct. By the time the fourth raid hit, this time a full-scale incursion onto Agrimutin, Beletus, the patterns were undeniable. Even the planetary governor, a man known for believing in neither coincidence nor probability, noted that the Orks bypassed fortified sectors to strike power relays marked only in subterranean. They knocked out coolant networks, not because they needed to, but because it disrupted the planetary defense grid's charge cycle. No Ork could have planned that, and yet they did. A captured Nob was brought in, huge, scarred, laughing. He didn't speak Low Gothic, didn't need to. On his armor were streaks of red paint, swirled into the same spiral Monitorius had seen. His war cry recorded during battle matched the frequency of the pulse first heard in the third raid. The Nob was dissected. His throat cords showed artificial scarring, evidence of deliberate pitch modulation. His larynx had been reshaped by injury or surgery to sing a particular beat. The noise was becoming language. The language, form. Imperial strategy dictates that Ork raids are to be repelled, not studied. They are not worthy of analysis. But on Damocles' edge, the raids did not stop. They began answering each other. Attacks would begin before survivors had even broadcast their location. Some settlements fell without a shot, fire dorks appearing already laughing, as if they knew the outcome. At first, commanders assumed a new war boss had risen, a Mogrok, some towering beast organizing from the shadows. But Ospec's returns showed nothing. No flagship, no central horde, just hundreds of tiny mobs, linked not by proximity, but by tempo. Each new fight echoed the last, not in tactic, but in tone, a melody of slaughter building towards a crescendo. By the time the Administratum approved escalation, the raids had looped back. The first world struck. Farnsdrift was hit again. Same tunnel, same landing. But this time, the Orks came with banners, not of Mogrok, but of the spiral. Each glyph more refined, more detailed. A picked language grown in 3 weeks. As if the raids themselves were ink blots, turning into letters. And they didn't take ground. They drew on it. Their boots traced lines into the dirt. Their bullets marked borders. One entire platoon was found staked in the shape of an arrow pointing north, not random savagery, but choreography. Monitorius' final log, before communication ceased, was short. The Waaaghs is composing. Each battle is a stanza. Each glyph, a note. We are inside its song, and we cannot stop dancing. On the frozen edges of the Theron Reach, where the atmosphere crusts against its own cold, and ash drifts like slow snow. The ruins of Outpost 99A seemed at first glance to be another casualty in the long list of Ork incursions. But picked captures retrieved from a downed recon drone revealed an unsettling detail. The dead had arranged themselves. The Orks were sprawled in formations too deliberate to be random, too chaotic to be strategic. Burned bodies formed crescents. Torsos faced the same direction. Blood pools followed no natural slope, but bled into curved lines that terminated in half circles of wreckage. At the center, a Nob's severed arm clutched a broken banner pole, planted into a pile of discarded cogitator cores. Cores painted with a single, swirling glyph, the spiral again, now filled with 8 jagged dots like teeth dots. Tech Priest Meritic observed the feed in silence, flanked by worry, servitors incapable of awe or dread. He alone felt the pattern, not mathematically, not analytically, but viscerally. The glyph was not just drawn, it was performed, as if each orc had a role, and death was not the end, but the final brushstroke. He extracted still frames, overlaid them, traced the positions. They formed a crude skull, not orc-made, human, wearing an ecclesiarchy coronet, another outpost. This one on the jungle world Vask Prime. Different terrain, different climate, same glyph, same spiral. And again, the wreckage formed patterns. Broken sentry guns, placed nose to nose. Lost cabines jammed into the soil like ritual stakes, all pointing northward. And the orcs, killed by overcharged reactor bursts deliberately triggered. Their corpses ringed the explosion site in a formation resembling a sunburst. 8 bodies, arms outstretched. Meritic began mapping each raid as a brushstroke, not militarily, but artistically. He processed the battlefields as canvases. He mapped blood trails, shell craters, scorch lines, and body positions into a single digital overlay. What emerged wasn't strategy. It was symmetry, rotational alignment between raids, negative space between wreckage clusters echoing earlier skirmishes. Even plasma splatter patterns repeated, as if imitating previous engagements. Some formations were almost poetic in their violence. On the mineral fields of Sedac 7, 3 entire squads were found disassembled, not butchered, unmade. Armor plates removed cleanly, organs arranged in concentric circles, hearts placed at exact equipment. Orc graffiti ringed the scene, but every glyph was clean, deliberate. Even the splatter showed restraint, as if someone was painting with arterial spray rather than spilling it. Meritic cross-referenced every battlefield with ancient, Terran art form, cathedral floor mosaics, pre-unification chaos cult diagrams, Da Vinci era anatomical sketches. Some elements matched, others exceeded known human symbology. It wasn't just art, it was instructional. Every battlefield seemed to be part of a larger schematic cut, apart by topography, fragmented by planetary rotation. But together, it might be building something, a shape, a symbol, or a map. He sent his findings to the nearest inquisitorial node. There was no reply. Then the reports began to change. Not just repeated glyphs or staged corpses, but errors, orcs pausing mid-charge to drag wounded bodies into place. A grot interrupting a firefight to smear oil in a crescent around a lost Enk carcass. One picked feed showed an Ork Warboy, half his face torn off, crawling into position before detonating a crack grenade beneath himself, not at the enemy, but beneath his own spine. His remains curved like a comma beneath the wrecked fuselage of a Valkyrie. Dropship Meritic's data servers began to hum with overheating, not from strain, but from activity. Files were rearranging themselves, image folders recategorized not by date, but by symmetry. His own auto-organizing system had begun following the patterns. It had learned them. When he attempted to override, his console froze. Not crashed locked. A warning glyph appeared, not Gothic, not binary, but Orc, drawn in spirals, then replaced with the phrase UCIT2. He purged the system, reformatted every codge, disconnected the new spheric links, but the patterns stayed in his mind. Even now, in isolation, without data, he could close his eyes and see the placements, the splatter ratios, the curves of blood trails aligned to magnetic north, the way orc corpses fell like sculptors, sketches loose, expressive, yet deliberate. He began sketching them, not as diagrams, as paintings, blood-colored inks, grease-mixed pigments, on stretched plasteel sheets. He didn't know why, only that it had to be done. Each brushstroke revealed another. Each image called the next, and in every piece, one shape repeated, a circle, divided into 8 parts, spiraling inward, always inward. Then he stopped sleeping. When a Waaaghs biologist was finally dispatched to retrieve him, they found Meritic crucified in his own workroom, not by blades or chains, but wiring. His own mechadendrites had wrapped around his limbs. His data port was jammed with paintbrushes. His final canvas was unfinished, but massive, 6 meters wide. It showed a planet splitting open like a skull. Inside, orcs danced, not in fury, but in formation. 8 rings of them, each ring holding a different tool. Not weapons, instruments. The canvas burned. 5 hours later, when the outpost's reactor detonated, whether it was sabotage or culmination, no one knows. But the pict feed before signal loss captured something impossible. A lone orc standing in the center of the fire, arms outstretched, his body not flailing, not fleeing, but posing, head back, arms wide, like a conductor about to bring down the first note. The first Vox failure over Kalth's outer moons was blamed on solar interference, the second on sabotage. The third wasn't blamed at all, because no one survived to report it. Watch-post. Exigis 13 went dark at 0400, local standard, not with silence, but with sound, a low pulsating thrum that filled every frequency of the local net. Comms officers tore off headsets, psychers clutched at their temples, even servitors twitched off rhythm. The sound bypassed encryption, it bypassed logic, it bored into thought. When the relief barge Diligence arrived 3 hours later, they found Exigis 13 stripped clean, not destroyed, disassembled, cogitator banks removed in perfect rows, chairs repositioned into concentric circles. Blood pooled in arcs that mirrored nothing on the map but matched a waveform pattern when mapped later. No orcs were present, just teeth. Hundreds of them, arranged on the command deck, in neat piles, sorted by size. Somewhere in the decoding chambers of Segmentum Tempestus, Lex Mechanic Vesemir III watched the playback on loop. He wasn't assigned to the case. He inserted himself, not out of protocol, but obsession. What caught his attention wasn't the carnage. It was the rhythm, the background interference. The noise that flooded every recording wasn't random. It looped. 4 pulses, pause, 2 pulses, longer pause, then repeat. Crude, but consistent. Vesemir filtered it through O-spec software designed to interpret Mechanicus Hymenal. What came back was structure, percussion almost. Meter. He rewound the logs from Varn's drift, matched the sound of orc war drums to the Exigis static. They aligned, not in tone, but in timing. The beat matched troop movement, orc charges, vehicle ignition, even friendly fire incidents. At first he believed it was coincidence, the chaos of battle, but then he compared it to the cadence of orc speech during prior Waaaghs events, the glyph chant, the repeated roars. Even their laughter, it wasn't chaos. It was repetition, measured, reinforced. Each guttural bellow reinforced the same rhythmic structure. He began calling it the pulse script, a sonic doctrine not spoken, but felt. On Kalth's moon, Domasic, the pulse grew louder. Psychers stationed on the listening stations began reporting dreams of stomping boots, of voices chanting in words they did not know, but understood. One, an alpha-rank choir mind named Selen Thas, was found insensate, mouthing orc battle cries, in perfect sync with seismic data from the moon's crust. She had never heard the language before. Her lips bled trying to form the shapes. The drums were not on the moon, they were under it. Imperial Guard regiments deployed to Domus Vi were issued noise-dampening helmets. It didn't help. The drumming wasn't only auditory, it was tectonic. Buildings shook in sequence. Fires guttered in time. Even heartbeats began sinking. Soldiers became irritable. Sleep cycles failed. Eventually, some began marching in place at night, unaware, their boots forming echoes of the rhythm buried beneath their minds. One squad unit cask refused orders entirely. not out of rebellion, but because they claimed to be waiting for the drop. When pressed, they couldn't explain what drop, but their captain's data slate showed a sketch drawn in grease pencil, a waveform, jagged and cruel, marked with the word Waagh, not as text, but as timing intervals. Orks finally surfaced on day 4, not in mass, but in procession. They came, not charging, but stomping, in sync, every boot fall, like a hammer strike. War drums beat behind them, massive constructs made of tank tread and bone. The sound hit like an impact weapon. Pulse waves caused nausea, vertigo, and bleeding from the ears. Some defenders tried to shoot, but their targeting servos seized. Mech units moved offbeat. They stumbled. They failed. The Orks didn't fire a shot for the first 5 minutes. They just walked, letting the sound collapse the front line. Then the killing began. Vesemir realized too late that the pulse script wasn't just for Orks. It was a virus, a mnemonic weapon embedded in rhythm, like a hymn you can't forget. A beat your foot taps without permission. It doesn't care what species you are. It just wants to move you. Command collapsed. Units began moving toward the drums, unaware. Vox operators repeated enemy chants between messages. Even orbital support missed coordinates, adjusting their barrage timings unconsciously to match the pulse. In one infamous log, a squad trapped in a ravine was recorded chanting "Ere we go" before detonating their own charges prematurely. When their remains were recovered, they had rearranged sandbags before death into semicircles. Some believed the Orks had a psyker in their ranks. Others believed it was the work of some strange Xenos technology, but Vesemir's logs held a simpler theory. The sound was enough. No warp, no spell, just pressure. Pressure that found the soft points in thought and pushed. Because doctrine relies on timing, and if you own the timing, you own the doctrine. One final experiment sealed Vesemir's fate. He played a reverse-filtered version of the pulse script across a low-frequency speaker grid to a captured grot. The creature sat motionless for 11 seconds, then stood, not angrily, not frenzied, but with purpose. It moved toward the wall, dragging its nails in a spiral, then sat cross-legged and smiled. The sound wasn't just command, it was home. Vesemir disappeared 2 days later. His cogitator was found still running. The final file was a waveform, digitally rendered in Imperial Gothic lettering. It read, "IT doesn't need to be loud, just clear." Sigma Delphin was not listed as strategic. It was a dead orbit, long stripped of value by mining guilds during the Pale Crusade, but something returned. There's something that bled static into astropathic transmission and pulled dead satellites out of sync. A space hulk cracked its atmosphere in a slow, deliberate descent, its hull layered in rusted plates and open wounds of fusion scoring. The vessel bore no name, only a massive symbol, welded across its flank in glyph metal. Not Gork, not Mork, something else. A face with no jaw, just a gaping, smoking cavity where speech should be. The kill team sent to investigate was led by Inquisitor Ardent Val. Ordo, Xenos, 5 operatives. 3 hours of contact. Then, signal loss. When picked feed was recovered from the team's servo skulls, it began with silence, not voice. Reverent silence. Inside the hulk, the Orks did not shout. They knelt. They had constructed a shrine. Crude, enormous. It loomed at the heart of a central chamber, surrounded by hanging wires and defaced servitors arranged like supplicants. The shrine itself was not shaped like an orc god. It was shaped like a machine, half-finished, brutalist, beautiful in its horror. At its base lay offerings, not teeth, not guns, but blueprints, scrawled in blood oil, ash, drawings of a war engine that defied logic. Its cannon mounted inside its own mouth, its treads vertical, its smokestacks bent backward to scream fire into its own cockpit. It made no sense. It should not work. But every orc had drawn it the same way. Some on the walls, some on scrap metal. one on its own skin. The mech's name was unpronounceable, but its glyph repeated everywhere, always surrounded by 8 jagged strokes, each one ending in a spiral. It was not Gork, not Mork, but something both within and beyond. A design, a ghost of a weapon never built, a myth engineered into being. Val's final log, before her mind collapsed into static, recorded a single line. They remember what never was. The orcs inside the Hulk never claimed the mech had existed, but they acted as if he had. They referred to his works. They imitated his designs. One knob bore an artificial jaw carved to mimic the mech glyph, locking his mouth in permanent silence. Another carried a cannon that did not fire but howled. Its ammo drum was hollow. Its roar triggered seismic aftershocks, but no kinetic damage. A weapon that should not function, and yet it had killed 2 members of the team before being dismantled. The shrine's location mapped precisely to the Hulk's neural nexus, a place where command logs would have once routed through the ship's cortex. But the cogitator core had been hollowed out. In its place, a cylinder of scrap. Inside, 8 rotating blades, none connected, all turning independently. Perpetual motion, powered by nothing, and still, it moved. Later data recovery showed that this engine was surrounded by orcs in meditation. They hummed, not chaotically, but in rhythm. Their tusks clicked. Their eyes rolled back. Their bodies formed a perfect spiral around the core. Some had etched circuitry into their own skulls with fingernails. One bore the words "I saw it built," carved in repeating lines down his spine. The weapon wasn't real, but they believed it was, and in Ork gestalt, belief is enough. What is a mech, if not a prophet of function, a builder of futures that do not yet exist? This one, this unmech, had no body, no history, only pattern. But his pattern spread like a virus. Every orc in that Hulk had modified their armor to reflect fragments of the blueprint. Split tusk plating, flame vents aimed inward, energy conduits that didn't connect to anything but still glowed. Inquisitor Val's interrogator, Codicil Trask, survived long enough to be recovered. He spoke in broken Gothic, mixed with Orcish syntax. His final coherent statement: "It's not a machine, it's a memory, but we caught it too early. It's still growing." A week later, on a completely different world, Grelk's man-orc warband was seen deploying a siege cannon, shaped almost identically to the unbuilt weapon schematics. It fired once. The shot curved mid-air. No targeting system, no guidance rune, just curvature. The shell impacted a cathedral bunker with impossible precision. When the wreckage cooled, the glyph was there retched by the heat bloom alone. The spiral of the unmech, he never lived, but his shadow spread. The ecclesiarchy declared it heresy to speak of the event, not because of Xenos tech, but because it suggested that thought could construct reality. That belief, a long collective, loud, bloody belief, could summon not gods, but devices, not miracles. Engines. No other race does this. Not like the orcs. They do not invent. They remember things that have never happened. They remember them loud enough, long enough, wide enough, and the galaxy bends to fit. The Hulk was destroyed with a triple fusion payload. No survivors. No data left. But somewhere, orcs still build spirals. Still paint glyphs that no one taught them. Still draw blueprints of a war engine no mech ever forged. Because somewhere in the war howl of collective memory, that mech still exists, and he is still building. Forge World Helix V was under siege, but not the kind that unfolded in straight lines or defensive grids. The orcs came in waves, yes, but they didn't hold ground. They didn't press toward the reactor core. They didn't even breach the magro lines that connected the manufactorum spines. What they did was stranger. They landed, looted, and left, then returned. Same vectors. Same corridors, but never twice, with the same pattern. Ski Tarii, I record as Prime. Tsar 92 had been tasked with tracking battlefield material degradation. He was not trained in theory. He did not speculate, he only observed, and what he observed refused to fit within acceptable parameters. One incursion would see the Orks disassemble entire gunships, carefully sorting components into piles by material weight. Another left a line of lemon rust tanks untouched, except for their Kamzara each ripped out and inverted, reassembled into a crude dish formation, pointed toward the planets. Moonzar began to follow them. He mapped the scavenging routes not by location, but by intention. Looting trails formed spirals, always clockwise, always terminating at points of conflict. But the targets were never the most valuable. Instead, they were sensorial. Things that exploded, things that screamed, things that shocked when touched. The Orks weren't stripping tech. They were testing stimuli. Every time a defense drone retaliated with unexpected firepower, the Orks took that part. When a weapon failed to trigger under pressure, they ignored it. If a plasma vent killed one of their own, mid-loot, they dragged the body into a circle and marked it with teeth. To Tsar, it looked like chaos, until he began running feedback logs through a tonal alignment filter. Patterns emerged. Each site looted in a different frequency. Weapon detonations, engine hums, servo whines all mapped to audio signatures. The Orks were tuning the battlefield. Not for sound, full response curves. Each encounter, a form of calibration. Each retreat, a reset. One picked log showed an Ork squad entering a mag lift station and targeting only reactive systems. Not power cores, not ammunition caches, but motion detectors, proximity mines, shock barricades. They triggered traps, recorded them crudely, with dangling vox mics and pixelate shards. One even mimed the motion of a servo arm, while another watched intently, nodding. They left without taking anything but a single cable coil, which they hung like a noose from a promethium pipe. Tsar's mind, augmented but not immune, began to spiral. He wrote notes in cog code, then rewrote them in binary verse. It helped him think, helped him remember that what he was seeing wasn't irrational. It was method. The Orks were reverse engineering defense logic not to replicate it, but to manipulate it. They were building a response map, not of the battlefield, but of the humans defending it. They wanted to know what scared what triggered the Omnissiah's children to fire, what made them pause, which weapon systems stalled when confused, what pressure would cause panic fire, what movements would look like a threat, and which would pass unnoticed. They were testing humans the way a codebreaker tests a cipher by pressing until something cracked. When the data began repeating, Tsar felt the shift. He noticed that Ork looters started arriving with pre-built shapes replicas of the items they'd stolen in previous raids, but warped, enlarged, weaponized. A servo-skull shell, enlarged into a helmet. A discarded las pistol wired into a hissing totem. One carried a portable Vox unit stripped to loop a 5-second scream on repeat. They weren't just building weapons. They were building responses, and those responses were being fed back into their formations. The next wave came not to loot but to deploy. They carried mirrors of everything they'd taken. Weapons without power, cells, shields that couldn't deflect, comes units that broadcast nothing, profs, but placed precisely to trigger Imperial responses. Turrets fired at decoys. Sensor drones pinged false positives. And in the confusion, the real Orks moved unchallenged. The looting had not been preparation. It had been programming. Each item taken was a lesson in how to provoke. Each discarded shell a test balloon. Tsar realized too late he wasn't watching scavengers. He was watching a rehearsal. In one transmission, a skittery cohort engaged a seemingly unarmed Ork group. The Orks retreated, laughing, but the path they followed left behind a breadcrumb trail of scrap each. piece marked with heat scars, as if touched by plasma. The skittery followed, every one of them, into a kill zone pre-painted in phosphorus dust, igniting on impact. Later analysis showed that none of the scrap had been explosive. It had just been shaped like fear. Tsar attempted to warn command. His final message was fragmented, broken by electromagnetic distortion, but the last line was clear. They aren't looting for gain. They're looting for us. They're building us into their plan. When his body was found, it was beneath the wreck of a collapsed refinery dome. Around him, the Orks had arranged objects in a spiral broken bionics, melted lenses, spent shock rounds, not one piece of alien tech, all Imperial, all his, a tribute, or a mirror, because in the end, it was never about what the Orks took, it was what they learned from the act of taking, and what they would do once they knew exactly what would make you break. They say, he spoke, once, not shouted, not bellowed, not the guttural war cries that shake armor plating and rattle human nerves. Just one phrase, one word, then nothing again. Never again. Yet Orks still repeat it. Across 3 sectors, in dialects too crude to align, they echo syllables they do not understand, because he said them, or maybe because he didn't need to. He has no name in Imperial record, no official designation, no picked capture. But fragments of his presence exist, in battle reports, in wreckage, in terrified whispers from prisoners who only saw him in the periphery. They call him the Walking Maw, or the Black-Eyed Flame, or, simply, Da Wan Wat, don't talk. He doesn't carry a claw, doesn't ride he walks, always at the front, through fire, through plasma, through collapsing bunkers, never running, never dodging. He doesn't command, but Orks move around him as if ordered, clearing paths, flanking with instinctive precision, falling silent when he passes. Inquisitor Velen of the Ordo Xenos compiled all known appearances. They form a spiral across the edge of the ghoul stars. Worlds raised, not in a linear pattern, but a widening arc, each point bearing signs of his presence. Not his signature, but the absence of one. No glyphs, no banners, just a shadow in the aftermath. And Orks that listened, at Varnic's reach, a full guard regiment fell without firing a shot. The Orks appeared in complete silence and heard. They marched in time. Their boots pounded the ground, but not a single mouth opened. The warboss walked ahead of them, through burning promethium fields, his skin unblackened, his eyes reflecting the flame but showing no expression. When the guard opened fire, the warboss raised a single finger. The Orks stopped, then turned, then laughed, as if the gesture had been an entire speech. One survivor reported something stranger. He swore he heard a voice in his head, not human, not orc, but heavy like metal scraping through bone. The voice didn't speak words. It pulsed, a rhythm, a pressure behind the eyes. And then, silence again. But from that moment, he said, he could feel where the warboss was going next. He deserted, the only one who did. On Hive Moon Salkut, Vox signals went dead the moment the warboss entered atmosphere. Not jammed, not scrambled, just absent. Entire Vox towers still stood intact, but no signals passed through. Communication died as he passed, reconnected once he left. A null field, not of physics, but of will, as if the warboss's silence expanded outward, swallowing frequency and doubt alike. The Orks began painting his glyph, though he never carried one. A crude spiral, black on black, negative space art, one level deeper into obscurity with each brushstroke. Some didn't paint it at all. They just stared and nodded, as if recalling a speech they never heard, but remembered anyway. At Rex Divide, an Adeptus Astartes kill team engaged the Orks in open field pursuit. They cut through the front lines cleanly, then stopped, not from resistance, from confusion. The Orks ahead were waiting, not attacking, standing in crescent formation, their backs turned, heads bowed. In the center, the war boss stood, silent, unmoving. The kill team opened fire. Every round missed, not from misfire, from recalibration. Targeting lenses bolter lines skewed, servo muscles twitched over them. The Astartes felt their own breathing fall out of tempo. Then the Orks turned, and it was over. Velen noted something else. On every world where the mute warboss appeared, dreams changed. Even before the landing, civilians reported nightmares of static-filled landscapes. Priests dreamt of spirals painted on the sky. Astropaths screamed at nothing, tearing out their tongues as if something had spoken too clearly. One even wrote a message in her own blood before dying. He doesn't speak because the Waagh already knows. The theory formed slowly, not in labs, but in the field, among dying Vox operators and field surgeons, among artillery teams that found themselves humming in rhythm between The warboss did not issue commands. He synchronized. His silence became signal. His presence aligned pulse, breath, thought. The Orks didn't obey him because they feared him. They obeyed him because, in his silence, they heard the correct frequency. It wasn't control. It was resonance. The warboss didn't speak because the Waaaghs was already speaking through him. He had become a tuning fork for violence. At Kador's Hollow, a final experiment was run. A captured Orkwan who'd followed the mute prophet was placed in a zero-sensory chamber. No light, no sound, no stimuli. Within minutes, the Ork began pounding its head into the wall, not in madness, in rhythm. When removed, it recited a string of phrases that did not match any known dialect, but the cadence perfectly matched to the warboss's recorded footfall intervals on prior battlefields. Velen's last report is marked sealed. Her final note: the prophet without words is not leading. He is listening, and the war through him has begun to remember what unity feels like. The Ork was unconscious when they brought it in, not sedated asleep, naturally, peacefully, breathing in ragged intervals that, when plotted, formed a pulse beat nearly identical to the rhythms observed during prior Waagh engagements. It twitched once, then again, a leg spasm, a tooth grind, then a low murmur in the back of its throat knot, a growl, not a snore, a word repeated. Glyphic analysts disagreed on the translation. Some claimed it was a phrase, others insisted it was a name, but all agreed the glyph didn't exist until that night at Ordo Zeno's research. Vault B91 buried beneath the polar crust of Harrowin. The Orks were not interrogated. They were recorded, hooked into biosynaptic relay arrays, their dreams charted as neural architecture. Normally, such scans yielded static, repetitive loops of violence. But this one, the sleeper, showed something different. A REM spike so aggressive it triggered an automatic stasis clamp on the monitoring equipment. Brain activity spiked into the alpha-omega bandwidth, beyond psychic range. Beyond rational range, it began broadcasting. The other Orks across the vault witched in response at first. It was written off as ambient bleed. Then the skin changed. The sleeper's left shoulder developed a glyph, not inked, not scarred, grown, a pigment mutation forming exact spiral patterns previously seen on wreckage left behind by the mute warboss. But this Ork had never seen battle, never left containment. The glyph was remembered, and it wasn't alone. By the end of the night, 3 other Orks in separate vault cells exhibited matching growths. Not identical, but rhymed. Spirals nested within spirals. Variants of the same dream. That morning, every pictorecord from Vault B91 showed a faint discoloration across its displays, an oily sheen, barely perceptible, shifting in color. Tech adepts scrubbed the systems, found nothing. But the machines still hummed. Not broken, just off-key. Lead. Xenobiologists. Erasta. Morn initiated dream isolation protocol. The sleeper was suspended in an isolation tank. Neuroscanners mapped dream cycles, but the machines could not stabilize. Every time the Ork entered REM, the chamber vibrated, audibly. No source found. No, 'cause isolated. Yet the walls began to hum in rhythm with its brain. It wasn't dreaming, it was sharing. Other Orks began vocalizing in sleep, words that matched no known language, but matched each other. Their brainwaves synchronized across distance. Different cells, different chambers, but identical cadence. Identical glyphs appearing across bodies, wrists, necks, shoulders emerging from beneath the skin like bruises given direction. Some glyphs flickered with bioluminescent charge under extreme UV. They weren't static symbols. They were evolving, shifting into each other, or into something waiting. Erasta requested immediate sanction. Her notes read, "The dreams are not symbolic. They are mnemonic. The Orks are not processing memories, they are creating them, and we are inside their archive." Surveillance picts began to fail. Not from malfunction, from misalignment. Footage lagged by tenths of a second. Orks appeared to shift position mid. Motion detectors pinged, while cells were visibly still. But when frames were reassembled, the movement was Clerox adjusting posture in time with each other. They were dancing, even in sleep. Dreamcodes bled into the station. Adepts began speaking glyphs without knowing. One killed himself after scrawling the same symbol onto his own face 23 times, repeating, "It's too loud in color. I need black." The Orks were moved to deep vaults, cryo-suspended, but the hum didn't stop. Vault walls vibrated in harmonics. Entire cogitator stacks fell out of sync. Dreambleed was real. It wasn't psychic. It wasn't mimetic. It was something older. A code, spoken without language. Final protocol was initiated. Project Pallid Vault? One by one, the Orks were terminated. Bodies incinerated, not buried, not archived, deleted. The glyphs vanished from their flesh, as fire touched them, not burned away, but retracted, as if knowing their container had failed, except one. The sleeper. His glyphs didn't burn. They spread by the time his tank was opened. The chamber was covered in crude symbols grown, not into the metal, but beneath it. Paint that emerged from corrosion. Glyphs formed in mold patterns. Symbols in the frost on steel. The Ork's eyes opened. He didn't scream, didn't move, just smiled. The entire station lost signal 17 minutes later. A kill team dispatched from nearby. Heroine found only silence. No bodies, no battle. Just rows of empty cells and glyphs scratched onto every surface. Not in blood, not in ink. Just lines repeated. In spirals, in loops. And on the last door, "You dreamed IT too." What escaped Vault B91 wasn't a weapon. It wasn't an Ork. It was a dream, a shared idea. Viral, rhythmic, memorable, across 3 sectors. Orks began waking with the same patterns etched onto their arms. Orks who had never fought, never met, yet drew the same symbols, built the same crude totems, sang the same strange humming tune. Because Orks don't just dream in color, they dream in consensus. And when they wake, they remember what they never lived. There is no official name for the world. Its original designation was purged from the data vaults when the exterminatus order was carried out. A quiet removal. No martyrdom, no monuments. Just a line redacted, a planet forgotten. But the Orks did not forget. Surveyor drones, dispatched by rogue trader Beliseth, decades later, recorded heat signatures, movement, even noise. Unbelievable, given the atmosphere had long since gone toxic. The crust split, oceans gone. No biosphere remained. And yet, there they were, shapes in motion. Orks, thousands of them, moving not randomly, not mindlessly, but in rhythm, in formation. They weren't fighting each other, they were fighting something that wasn't there. The drone showed squads taking cover behind blasted charging across open plains, leaping trenches that hadn't been dug in 10,000 hours. Sometimes they fired, often they didn't. They mimed recoil, simulated impact. One squad threw themselves to the ground in perfect synchronization, as if reacting to artillery that never landed. And when the performance ended, when the imagined enemy was routed, they reset, built the barricades again, replaced their mock weapons, took positions, and began the war again. Beliseth thought it. Malfunction, echoes, glitch, until a drone was shot from the sky, its shell punctured not by bullet or beam, but by a gesture. A knob pointed, roared, and the drone failed, crashed, not physically destroyed, but functionally overwhelmed, as if the planet itself had remembered what it meant to be a battlefield, and rejected observation. An Adeptus Mechanicus recon team was sent next. What they found was impossible. Structures built from scorched bone, walls made of nothing but memory, barricades that fell apart when touched but reformed when stepped away from, orcs shouting into the void, roaring at empty dying on command. Some wore no armor at all, just smears of black soot, but each mark was deliberate. The same smudge, the same cut. Each knob bore a glyph on their chest, a spiraled skull with jagged eyes, always smeared, never drawn, a symbol half-dash remembered. It was not a fortress, not a tribe, it was a stage. And the war being fought was not to win, it was to remember. 1 Magos attempted to map the battle cycles. The orcs repeated 27 discrete maneuvers, always in the same order, but not identically, each time with small variation. A faster charge, a sharper flank. The formations evolved, but the sequence remained, over and over, again and again, until it wasn't just routine, it was ritual. Orcs do not record history, they scream it, scar it, echo it. But here on a world scorched beyond recovery, they practiced it, not to teach, but to train, not for knowledge, for muscle. Muscle that would not forget. The battle never ended. It wasn't allowed to end. Each orc knew their role, knew where to fall, when to rise. They responded to invisible volleys, shouted in response to unseen orders. When one died, the others dragged the body to the staging ground, where it was painted, then returned to formation, not as a soldier, as a marker. Their dead became terrain. A tech priest among the observers theorized. This was no longer combat, it was genetic inscription, a behavioral imprint passed across generations, not through words, but through warplay, repetition encoded into the bio-instinct of orc youth, because no matter where the Waaaghs traveled, no matter how many died, this one battle would live, a training loop for a future not yet arrived. But one thing stood apart. At the heart of the craterware, the first impact of Exterminatus had cratered the world. A single tower stood, not a fortress, a scaffold, made from scrap, bones, melted tanks, its height irrelevant, its shape changing hourly. The orcs built it, tore it down, built it again, always slightly different, always remeasured, as if trying to remember it properly. This was not a target. It was a memory anchor. Whatever war was being reenacted here, that tower had been its center. An orc, larger than the rest, circled the structure without climbing it. He did not speak, did not lead, but whenever he passed, orcs adjusted their positions, recalibrated their stances. If one broke formation, he would appear, not punish, just watch, and the orc would fall back into line. One observer called him a conductor, another a priest, but no record confirmed his origin. No battle logs matched his armor, no glyphs bore his name. He was part of the memory, perhaps, the memory itself. Then came the anomaly. A survey drone, too small to detect, captured something new. One orc, breaking pattern, looking at the camera, not attacking, smiling, as if realizing, for the first time, that the performance had an audience. He reached out, and the drone's feed went black. In the days following, orcs across nearby sectors began mimicking unfamiliar formations. They used cover where they hadn't before, anticipated flanks, even mimicked failed tactics, ones that no current orc could have seen. The war on the glassed world had begun to leak, a silent broadcast of muscle memory, strategy by osmosis. A rehearsal turned viral. The orcs weren't evolving, they were remembering something better. And each time they fought, each time they looted, each time they charged into fire, they weren't just following instinct, they were practicing. For a war that never ended, because some battles don't need victors. Only. Perfect recall. Orcs have no archives, no libraries, no historians, and yet they remember. Across the Ultima Segmentum, a warboss slams his claw in two, a tank tread and roars, a joke that no human translator can parse, but every orc around him collapses in laughter. Half a galaxy away, an orc mech sketches the same punchline onto the hull of a kill cannon shell, though he's never met that warboss, never heard the joke. The lines match, the shape echoes, the glyph rhymes. It's not transmission, it's not culture, it's code. The Waaaghs is not just noise, it is syntax. This realization came not from a battle, but from a farsa failed infiltration on the agri-world of Ilmot's Hollow, where an Ordo Xenos sleeper agent, disguised as a grot, lasted 6 days in orc ranks before his cover shattered, not from behavior, from posture. He had stood wrong, not shouted wrong, not fought wrong, simply stood wrong. Spine at the wrong angle, shoulders too rigid. He had violated a rhythm encoded, not by law, but by pose. His death was immediate, but his recordings survived. The data was nonsense at first. Body movement telemetry, crowd noise, heat distribution. But when mapped by inquisitorial pattern C or KLREM, the recordings began to take shape. The orcs weren't simply milling. Their battlefield chaos, when overlaid across time, formed fractals, repeating shapes, evolving only slightly between engagements. Not identical, recursive. One formation a chaotic brawl near the ruins of Hyverdock when run in reverse. Exactly mirrored a skirmish on a space hulk 4 decades earlier. Even the casualties fell in mirrored arcs. These weren't isolated incidents. Rem found dozens. Poses, deaths, reactions, all remembered in the very choreography of violence. The screams matched to spectrogram analysis of orc war cries across 6 systems showed pitch, curves that repeated every 3rd cycle. Not song, not chant, signal, and where the pitch peaked, movement followed, as if the scream itself gave shape to the next maneuver. In some logs, orcs flinched before the scream reached them. Like a relay sound triggering motion, motion triggering more sound, all self. It wasn't madness, it was recursion. A battlefield programming language spoken in volume and movement, not grammar, and every orc was running it without knowing. Not instruction, but execution. A distributed system operating without central command. Rem called it the recursive codec. Others mocked the name, until the pattern infected a skittery cohort. On Lithrix 9, a Mechanicus detachment fell out of sync mid-assault. No orcs were present, no psychers, just echoes, sounds caught in voxchat, motion drift in servitor lines. Within 30 minutes, the cohort had aligned into a formation never taught, never even seen on that world before, but identical to a skirmish recorded on Yzeth Prime 4 years prior. The cohort was extracted, their data cores purged. Every one of them had received a subconscious rhythmic directive. No message, just a shape, and they obeyed it. The orcs hadn't been near Lithrix 9 in months. The code had traveled anyway. Rem theorized the recursive codec was not orc-specific. It was viral, a behavioral exploit that moved like laughter. You didn't learn it, you caught it, and once inside, it shaped your reactions, your instincts. You began to move as the Waagh moved, even if you didn't know it. He traced recursive pose patterns back 6,000 years. Fragmented picked captures, death scenes, skirmish snapshots. Always the same arc of the arm, the same lean of the head, the same footfall sequences across hundreds of war zones, and at the center of each a glyph, not a word, a loop docked the spiral. Sometimes in soot, sometimes in blood, sometimes just a smear of oil dragged across a wall, but always there, not as a symbol of allegiance, as a line of execution. Code, nested in culture. Orc dialects vary wildly, but their fighting doesn't. A Goth's charge mirrors a Death Skull's ambush when mapped through timing curves. A Bad Moon's retreat aligns with a Blood Axe feint 3 centuries apart. It was never planned. It was never taught. It was just running. An operating system of war. One Magos suggested it was psychic resonance's subconscious imprint from the Gestalt Waagh field. Another dismissed that entirely and claimed it was evolutionary selection only. Orcs that followed the code survived long enough to replicate it. Both were wrong. The truth was simpler and worse. The code isn't Orkis, it's Waagh itself. A pressure, a pulse, a shape of inevitability. It speaks through whatever species can hear it loud enough. Orcs hear it best. They obey it best. But once mapped, the codec began to appear elsewhere. Heretic guardsmen moving in loops, cultists falling into fractal prayers. Even one instance of a hive enforcer patrol mimicking orc looting spirals after a failed uprising without knowing. The Waagh wasn't spreading like an army. It was spreading like a script, one that rewrote instinct. And the orcs, laughing, screaming, dying in synchronized arcs, weren't mindless. They were compiling every pose, a function, every charge, a subroutine, every glyph, a logic gate, and somewhere deep beneath it all, the spiral turned, waiting for the last line of code to execute, waiting for the Waagh to run. It began the way all great failures do in overconfidence. The world was Cassiver Ikes, a munitions forge on the edge of the Eridani cradle, fortified by 4 orbital bastions, and shielded by a rotating flotilla of defense monitors. Standard doctrine predicted months of siege before breach. The enemy would be ground down. Supply lines held, artillery placed with mathematical indifference. And above all, the orcs, however loud, however many would break themselves against discipline. Except the orcs didn't start with a siege. They started with a joke. A lone rock smasher gunship spiraled into high orbit, ejecting teeth instead of bombs. A rain of crude orc molars hammered the upper dome of Bastion Alpha, shattering nothing, damaging nothing, just clattering across the plasteel in a cacophony of laughter and absurdity. Then came the broadcast, not threats, not war cries, just noise. A looping scream that phased into rhythm. 3 pulses, 2, then silence. Then again the vox banks of Cassiver translated it as gibberish. But down below, a junior cogitator clerk began tapping her boot to the beat. Across the monitoring halls, the guards started breathing in sync. No one noticed. Then the rocks fell, not in waves, in chords, crude, impossible vessels, spiraling in from separate vectors, none following predictable paths. Each one trailing glyphs, painted in the same spiral formation. Each impact not on target sites, but in places that drew a shape. Satellite imagery revealed it too late. The rocks had formed a symbol when seen from above, one massive spiral that nested around the forge's core. Each crash, each landing zone, each troop drop a line in the spiral's execution. Not chaos, not accident. A signature. Then came the raids. Small, incoherent, seemingly random. One strike team looted an empty barracks. Another blew apart a supply depot containing only broken respirators. A third dug trenches around a communications relay, filled them with grease, and set them alight without firing a shot. Command dismissed it all as erratic nonsense, but the pattern emerged beneath the noise. Each failed strike prompted a subtle shift in Imperial response, a redirect of manpower, a change in patrol routes, a fortified position left slightly understaffed to reinforce the next target. Bit by bit, the Orks weren't attacking positions, they were sculpting the defender's behavior. Each raid a line of code, each retreat a bracket closing, and all of it built toward something unseen. General Sale Vern, commander of the defense, ordered a full counteroffensive on day 13. The Orks had concentrated in Sector Gamma, piling scrap into towers, wiring speakers into dead tank holes, chanting into the smoke. Vu. Aaron saw it as a staging ground. It was a decoy. The moment the Imperial push began, the towers detonated not outward, but upward, broadcasting low-frequency shock pulses into the atmosphere. Defense satellites scrambled, Voxlinks descended. The Imperial lines advanced and never stopped. The feedback loop in their targeting arrays caused their own forward momentum to overextend, moving them past kill zones they couldn't perceive. The Orks didn't meet them head-on. They sidestepped, circled, painted around them. The retreat wasn't a failure, it was choreography. One field report showed a knob miming a soldier's exact stance 2 seconds before the human moved. Another showed Ork artillery striking before Imperial armor crossed into the projected zone. They weren't reacting, they were reading ahead. Every order from Vern came a beat too late. Every decision matched by a pre-written scream in Orkish echo chambers. Command fell not by death, but by delay. Meanwhile, the Orks built towers shaped like amplifiers, fortifications tuned not for defense, but resonance. One squad danced on rooftops with scrap drums, not randomly, repetitively. Another painted the same glyph across 5 separate districts, visible only from orbit. And when the final piece locked into place, the Waaaghs triggered not with an assault, but with a laugh. Every Ork, across every zone, roared the same cadence. Not battle, not fury, victory. Preemptive, unshakable, as if the war had already ended. And in their minds it had, because they believed. A psychic shockwave followed, not warp-based, not demonic, but cognitive. A pressure spike that registered in psyker arrays as a full-mind broadcast. Not language, not command, belief. Unshakable, monolithic certainty. So loud it spilled into the minds of humans. Some dropped weapons, others mimicked Ork chants. A few turned in place, smiling, whispering, it worked. They really did it, because the final step wasn't strategy, it was execution of outcome. The Orks had never tried to win, they had started from victory and walked backward. Every raid, every mock failure, every strange totem or shouted punchline, it wasn't misfire. It was rehearsal, building expectation, installing rhythm, aligning behavior, and when the final scream was released, the script finished compiling. Cas Ivor Ix didn't fall, it completed. Bow. RN died, not by blade or blast, but by silence. His vox feed faded as he muttered, they knew, his last words before static consumed the channel. Post-mortem. Scans of the battlefield revealed overlapping spiral formations, drawn in footfall patterns, exhaust trails, fire paths. The war itself had traced a glyph into the world, a final stamp, and then the Orks left. No looting, no occupation, just departure, because the Waaaghs wasn't a campaign, it was a script, and it had run its course. They had not planned to win, they had simply believed it loud enough that the galaxy could not disagree, and in that volume, that rhythm, that shared scream, the plan made itself. The Orks didn't build a strategy, they became one, and the galaxy, as always, obeyed the loudest voice, even when it made no sense, especially then.